Listen-only mode.
Hello and welcome to the webinar. My name is Angie Carter and I will be your technical producer and moderator this evening. This webinar will be presented by Anna Edwards, and we're going to talk a little bit about student development theory. Before we start the presentation, let's take a moment to ensure that everyone is ready and familiar with the webinar control panel. On the right side of your screen, you will see the attendee control panel, and on the left is the webinar viewer window. This viewer window will display the presenter's screen when the webinar begins. The control panel can be minimized or expanded by clicking on the horizontal double arrow button in the upper left corner. Minimizing the panel allows a better view of the presentation. Take a moment to practice. There are a few features of the control panel that the attendees should know. First, be familiar with the Raise Your Hand button. This button is located along the left side of the control panel. It allows you to virtually raise your hand if you have a question or if you want to respond to a question being asked by the presenter. Click this button to raise your hand now. Clicking again will lower your hand. Another important feature of the control panel is the questions pane. To submit a question, type it into the question box. These may be questions related to the presentation or technical questions related to the GoToWebinar system. You may also be asked by the presenter to type your ideas or responses here as part of an exercise during the webinar. Please send a quick note in your questions pane now. Questions may be submitted at any time. These will be monitored and we will continue to respond quickly if we see something that shouldn't wait until the Q&A period, such as making a clarification. During the webinar, you may be asked to respond to a polling question or survey. Please take the time to participate as your input and ideas are valuable to the group. Be sure to stay attentive and to interact as much as possible during this webinar. The quality of your experience depends on your attention and participation. Try to avoid the distractions of responding to email, checking Facebook, instant messaging, or working on other tasks at your computer. If you need to step away for a moment, do not close the GoToWebinar window as you will be required to log in again if you wish to rejoin the session. If you experience problems with the audio, one possible solution is to use the conference call number and listen to the presentation using your phone. Click the Use Telephone option in the audio pane of your control panel to view the conference call number. The webinar is being recorded and the online archive will be available to view on the CAPA website in approximately 2 weeks. Are there any questions? So now I'm going to hand over the microphone to Anna. And just as a reminder, we're going to have questions answered at the end of the presentation. So if you ask a question and it doesn't get answered right away, just know that it will be answered as we go along. Thanks so much, and here's Anna.
Great. Thank you so much, Angie, and it's good to see so many of you on tonight for an exciting webinar on understanding today's college student, which I know is probably one presentation that each of you are excited to hear about as you end a fall term advising many chapters across the country. Quick introduction, my name is Anna Edwards. You can see on the screen I work at the University of South Carolina, so I live and breathe college students on a day-to-day basis, so I hope to provide you with some insight into what all the fuss is about and how we can better work with them and understand them. I'm also on the NPC delegation, so get to work with college women all over the country, which is great. So we're going to go ahead and get started. If there are any questions, like Angie said, please post them and we can get to them either throughout the presentation or at the end. A couple goals for tonight's presentation for participants to know what student development theory is and how it applies to advising. Participants will know how the millennial student today differs from previous generations, that you would be able to utilize strategies for challenging and supporting chapter officers as they grow and develop. And participants will know where to find resources for working with college students. we know that many advisors across the country are not part of the millennial generation. And so working with college students for the last 5 or 6 years is very different than in the previous generations beforehand. So there are a lot of nuances about these students and how they were raised and how that translates into their leadership and their involvement on campuses. So I hope this will be helpful to you, and hopefully you'll learn a couple things about, I guess, the women that you advise and maybe make some sense into how they respond the way they do. So obviously high school and college are different. Many of the students that we work with on college campuses today have been used to the high school environment. So the differences range from expectations and what the expectations are from teachers and parents and other individuals that have supported them along their way. Freedom, the freedom that students have in high school is very different than what they have in college. There's less structure, a lot of free time, and a lot of opportunity, hopefully, to manage time well. And oftentimes students, if they don't manage that time well, find themselves in a little bit of trouble. I'm sure each of you haven't dealt with anything like that this semester. Motivation is different. In high school, everybody goes to class because it's what you do. College is a little different in that students have opted into attending college, taking on the additional debt, taking on the responsibility and the academic rigor that exists on college campuses. But college is a time for exploration and learning, and students are faced with difficult choices and experiences, and they oftentimes have to figure out how they respond and how they interact, and hopefully this makes them a better person and individual as they grow up. The level of independence in college is much different than it is in high school. Women, how often our women try, how our women try to utilize this newfound independence will shape their time on campus. Again, going back to the freedom, if they choose to utilize independence in a productive way through involvement on our campuses, that is a positive thing. If not, then they can again find themselves in some challenging situations. The last difference for high school and college, I'm sure none of this is new to any of you, is value judgment. So students have been under the watch and care of their parents for 18 years, and hopefully parents have instilled values that will help them be strong decision makers and make good judgment choices as they enter college. But the line of my work, and probably some of you who are on the call, is for those students who oftentimes do not make good judgment calls or find themselves in a difficult situation where they have to learn a valuable lesson. So a little more just about college. I think we all can probably remember from our time on college campuses is a time to figure it out. And so often when we are working with college students, and particularly women within our organization, they are exploring everything that they can explore. They're taking opportunities to get involved, to test the waters in a new area, and maybe to fail, just to fail in a safe environment where it's okay and you can rebound quickly and get back on your feet. I have a great document that I use with parents at work, and it compares high school and college. And a couple of things that I just wanted to note for this purpose of this presentation is, the teacher-student contact in high school is much different than the faculty-student contact on the college level. Teachers in high school, they're very close. They get that frequent contact from the teachers 5 days a week. College is not like that. They might meet with a professor individually once a week if they even seek out that opportunity and that time to meet with the faculty member outside of normal class. They meet in class 2 to 3 times a week and are probably, in most cases than not, in a large lecture hall where they would have to seek out additional support and make themselves known. Another thing is motivation. We mentioned motivation earlier, but students get their motivation in high school from parents, teachers, counselors, and those support systems that are in place. In college, We don't like to say that students are on their own because there are obviously support systems on a college campus to support students, but they definitely have to apply their own motivation to their work and find that internal drive. Um, the last thing that I just want to mention is the value judgment. I mentioned it earlier, but I think this is where we often find ourselves challenged as advisors and Kappa alums as we're out there in Kappa world helping women make good choices and learn great things during their time as an undergraduate. But in high school, students often make value judgment decisions based on parental values. And in college, we see that students are often testing out the waters and seeing the world through maybe their own eyes and developing their own opinions and their own values, which sometimes this is in conflict with what they've always known and been adjusted to. And then other times that is right in line with, I guess, what their parents have taught them. And then the transitions and adjustments. We'll talk a little bit about transitions later on because this is such a critical part of college student development because the transitions that we talked about earlier, just the differences in high school and college really play out in this first year. Some of you might be familiar with some of the first year study, first year seminar programs that many campuses have, but the development of those courses and the programs were because of this difficult transitional time that studies have shown first year students having on campuses, because it is a lot of adjustments. And I think if we all think back to our first few weeks on campus as a freshman woman, it was interesting and difficult, and I know I can speak to my experience and learned a lot, but also was challenged and made great friends and mentors who helped get me through some of those difficult periods. But I think this is important to know as advisors that you probably will not interact with a first year student in an advisory role, I guess, in the fall semester, could potentially in the spring semester in some of our officer positions. But understanding where these students are coming from and where they're going and how they got to the institution that they're currently in will help in just kind of developing that relationship. So now we'll get into the fun stuff, student development theory. I'm sure you are all thrilled by the topic and the title that I chose. Karen, I think the first title I chose, she said it was way too long, and so we just went with student development theory. So hopefully we didn't scare too many people away. But most of you probably are aware of what theory is. Theories are the process and guidelines that are developed through research in many different areas. Education just happens to be the area that I work in. But what student development theories do help us understand the progression that students have throughout their 4 to 5 years to 6 years on college campuses. And a lot of this early research was done in the late 19th century and early 20th century. Looking at college students, looking at how they progress, looking at what made them successful, and then looking at what institutions, faculty, staff, advisors could do to support students through this developmental phase. And there are 3 primary areas. If we're talking about student development theory, there are 3 types of development. The first one is change. It can be positive or negative, and it can be progressive or regressive. I think we could all speak to how we see change play out in our roles on campuses, whether we're an advisor or a staff member, faculty member. Growth. So again, it can be overall positive or negative, and just the growth functioning of an individual. And then the development is positive growth. So change, growth, and development will be the primary areas that we're talking about. And Chickering is one of the founders of student development theory in our field. And I thought this would just be a really good introduction. Chickering has 7 vectors that he believes students travel through to reach identity development. And most of this development occurs during the years that students spend on our campuses. And so I'm just going to walk through these 7 really quickly. And then if any of this information is particularly interesting to any of you, please put a note in the question box or send me an email, which will be at the end of the presentation, and I'm happy to follow up with anything else to make your advising roles make more sense, or make your students that you are advising make more sense, hopefully. So we're going to just walk quickly through these 7 vectors. And again, Chickering believes that these students will walk through these 7 vectors at different rates in various orders, but throughout their time through identity development. So the first vector is developing competence, and competence can be intellectual, physical, interpersonal. Vector 2 is managing emotions, so the student's ability to recognize and accept emotions and express and control them. I can think back to several experiences I've had as an advisor where I maybe didn't see students all the way through the managing emotions vector, that they were still learning how to accept different emotions and controlling them, especially when there are situations that they are faced with that maybe they've not been faced with previously. Vector 3 is moving through autonomy through interdependence. So this independence can be emotional, self-direction, problem solving, an awareness of interconnectedness with others. And so again, this is, the student comes onto our campuses, they come from a high school, maybe they don't know anybody, or they're looking to begin new and to redefine themselves, and then they quickly connect with a group on campus, whether it's their residence hall, it's their student organization, it's a sorority or fraternity. In our case, it's a sorority, and find that interconnectedness with others who share the same values, interest, and sense of fun, mostly. Vector 4, developing mature interpersonal relationships. This is an area that I think we probably spend a lot of our time as advisors and campus professionals working on with students. I believe one of the greatest things about college for many of our students is that they really learn how to interact in diverse settings. They learn how to deal with difficult people and hopefully come out of those situations on top and ready to handle any other situation that comes their way in the future. But this 4th vector focuses on an increased tolerance and appreciation of differences, capacity for healthy, lasting, and intimate relationships with partners and close friends. So we know the importance of close relationships, whether they be a romantic relationship or a friendship that develops through this experience in college and this development of this age group, 18 to 22. The 5th vector is establishing identity. And so this is, again, an area that we probably see this play out with some of our advisees and chapters. And this identity is the comfort with body and appearance, comfort with gender and sexual orientation, self-acceptance, and self-esteem. So I'm sure you are all thinking about Chickering's 7 vectors, and maybe a student, a woman that you advise, or a woman that you know in the chapter that maybe you see as kind of coming through some of these vectors, coming back, depending on situations that she encounters on campus or in her life. But establishing identity, I think, goes to the many challenges we see women face on campuses with body image, extreme exercising, dieting, the desire to look a certain way, to act a certain way, and they feel like it's maybe what they are to do. Vector 6 is developing purpose,
Anna,
developing clear vocational goals. So it's
Anna,
yes,
can I ask you a quick question? Are you?
yes,
There's a question as to whether we're supposed to be seeing the slides of the different vectors, and
no,
okay, all right. I'm sorry to interrupt you. I just wanted to clarify.
no, you're fine.
Okay,
You're fine. Yeah.
all right.
There was a question about seeing the different slides, and I don't have all of these on slides, but I can send it out if it's um, useful to folks. So developing purpose. So as students figure out what they want to do, most students come to college with a sense of a degree or a major or some desire to grow, to develop as they enter the real world. Um, and then the fourth or the seventh vector is developing integrity. So the human values, personal values, and developing congruence between the two. And I went into all that detail, and that's not on the slides, and I apologize for that. But I think that's just helpful in hopefully making some sense into how students develop and search really throughout their time, 4+ years on campuses. And then the psychosocial, cognitive, and typology, those are different types of theories that are woven into student development. And psychosocial examines the interpersonal lives or independent lives of the students and how all of that is interconnected. Cognitive is how students grow and develop cognitive and intellectually, both with the world on their campus and the world directly around them, and then the broad world outside of that. So those experiences that they have that help shape who they are. Typology examine differences in how they view the world and how they relate to the world. So any questions about student development theory? I know that takes you back to graduate school, or some of you that might be your world, but I felt like that was pretty important in shaping the discussion about today's college student and how they develop, and maybe hopefully making sense to some of the things you're observing as advisors. So let's talk a little bit about millennials. Millennials are our college students on campuses today. I don't know, I'm sure each of you're looking at this list and you're thinking maybe you have observed these characteristics in some women that you advise on campuses. Some of you may be millennials, but one of the things that in the millennial generation starts with 1980. So that is the millennial generation that we are speaking of now. And these students have changed the way we do things on campuses. The students come with a sense of how they operate, and they have in their own way, maybe on some public campuses differently than private campuses, but really brought a lot of their support systems and the individuals who have shaped them and made them who they are, and it has required lots of campuses to maybe alter how they interact with these students and their team that comes with them. Some of these, I don't know how many of you, this is considered a me generation. There's a lot of research and great books out there on the millennials and defining decade as the millennials out job searching. So I would encourage you, if this is a topic that's of interest to you and you have a particular desire in understanding how these students these women particularly who are in our chapters today operate, and why they are the way they are, and why they focus on the things that they focus on, I'd encourage you to dig more into that. But we'll walk a little bit into these 7 characteristics. And some of these might seem kind of elementary, but a lot of this is pretty rooted in research. And again, if you interact frequently with your advisees or the chapter on your campus, I'm sure you've seen some of this play out. These students believe they are special. They come from smaller families. The average family size, I think, is it's 1.7 children per family, and so they have received greater attention. They usually have, parents have carted them from activity to activity throughout their their childhood and thus far in their life. So they're used to feeling important and needed. And so you can only imagine how that translates to a college campus when you have 6,000 new students or 1,200 new students, and the desire for everybody to feel special. And the helicopter parents are probably individuals that hopefully you haven't had to work with too much as your as an advisor, but they do have these students have an increased security from their parents, and the parents are used to hovering around the children. We have a joke in our office where we call them Velcro parents because they attach and they don't come off. So it's, again, hopefully you've not had interactions with parents who will not let their children, their women, kind of make decisions on their own. But that's a little bit about the helicopter slash Velcro parent. The second characteristic that I think is important to cover tonight is the sheltered. Many of these students are sheltered more than previous generations. Parents kept them closer to home with a focus on connection to the family. But they were also involved in many sports and activities. So they were sheltered in terms of decision making and maybe activities that were going on around them, but also they were within their bubble of a family, whether they did school activities or the community or they were on sports teams. They were kind of carried through with that within that bubble. Today's students are confident. This parental involvement, as you've probably observed in your role as advisor, has led to coaching these students, and they've got a lot of adult involvement in what they do and how they respond and how they react to different situations. And so that gives them the support they need and also a lot of self-confidence that they've got, grown-ups, for lack of a better term, building them up and keeping them moving. Team oriented, these students are probably part of the most diverse American population ever. And so they've learned to be civil and in some situations less me-oriented than previous generations. And I know that seems kind of ironic since this generation is termed the me generation, but they learned early on to play nice and to share. And, I think this plays out when we see on college campuses and particularly in our chapters, how different chapter council officers interact with each other and how they interact with chapter members. Another characteristic about this type of student today is conventional. They are resourceful. They have never known life without the internet. They've never known life without social media in their grown-up interaction days. And they've also never known life without being connected through a cell phone that they have readily accessible. I was actually talking to a student or a previous student who is now a consultant for Kappa who was on our campus on Friday, and we were comparing consultant stories, and I shared with her that when we traveled that we had a cell phone that could only be used for emergencies, and definitely didn't have access to apps and social media the way they do now. And so she thought that I was probably from the dark ages, but these students definitely are utilizing technology better than any other generation before them, and that they ironically are more environmentally conscious. So they want to focus on how to preserve the earth. They want focused on sustainability and how to reuse. So you're probably seeing a lot of this play out in your role as an advisor. The pressure of today's college students. I think I've spoken to the team-oriented, confident confident, sheltered, feeling special. There is this sense of overscheduled with these students, over mentored. They've been driven to succeed among their peers. There's a pressure to attend college and the best college and receive the best scholarships. And and a lot of that I think we see play out in sorority life when we have a lot of women who are similarly matched, and they're all feeling that same pressure and recruited and part of a chapter that of students who are overachievers. And so it definitely plays out in many chapter situations that we've all dealt with. Um, and then high achieving, these students are individuals who are focused on long-term success. They, want to be told exactly what they need to do to get a job right out of college. So is that study abroad? Is it co-op? Is it an internship? Is it an internship with company A versus company B? What will give them the greatest access and the greatest achievement beyond their 4 to 5 to 6 years on a college campus? Oftentimes, these high achieving students also miss the details in the here and now. So, as they are focused on where they will go and what they will be and how much they will make, they oftentimes forget to just enjoy being a college student and not having the pressure of trying to figure everything out immediately. And I think that's one of the areas, just looking at these 7 characteristics. And if anybody has any questions or comments, feel free to post them. But I think I've, observed the high achieving play out with students. And, if you've ever interacted with any of these students' parents, when it comes to addressing a chapter situation, or maybe they just have some questions about the Kappa experience on that campus, the parents are very quick to say what their desire is for their student during their time on campus, to get a degree, get the best experience they can, and then to go forth, get into a great law school, graduate school, have the dream job. And that's a lot of pressure for even a 21 or 22-year-old student. There's another, and I will try to put this on maybe a slide that I can update with Karen, but the Beloit Institute puts out a list every fall in August that it highlights the what this year's college freshman has always experienced, what they maybe will never know, who they will never know, maybe TV shows that were gone before they were born. But it's a great way, and I would encourage all advisors to keep up with that each fall. And maybe that's something that Kappa can do, is share that on a Facebook post or on an advisor listserv. Because it's a great reminder that we can get so disconnected from today's college student very easily, even for those of us who work on a college campus, and forget that there are years and years between maybe our freshman year and their freshman year, and how life has changed, how our society has changed, how technology has changed. And so again, that's the Beloit list, and it's BELOIT. And I'll figure out a way to share that with you all. So strategies for working with college students. I think this is probably the area that I enjoy working with advisors the most on our campus, because it is a great time to work with really high achieving, very intelligent, very driven students, but understanding where they come from and then what we need to do and how we need to help them and support them, but also challenging them in a way that they will be better individuals, they'll be better prepared for life in the real world, maybe than they were when they came through our doors. And so this idea of challenge and support is a fairly frequently used term in student affairs, but it is this push and pull between challenging students, pushing them to be more, to be better, to make different decisions, challenging why they make the decisions they make, and then in the same vein, supporting them and understanding, recognizing that maybe they are going through a difficult time or that they've never faced a situation like this and that it might take a little more challenge and a lot of support to help get them through these situations. But I would say that would be, really a good strategy for you as advisors. And I know challenge feels like it's probably more prevalent at this time of the year, closing out school years, terms for officers, and really hopefully getting our chapter officers in a place where they are making solid decisions, they're holding each other accountable, but also giving them the support they need to address a significant chapter issue, maybe a member who is going through a difficult time, or maybe a campus issues. It's been a very interesting fall across the country on college campuses, and I think any way that we can support students and help them get from maybe point A to point B would be beneficial. Problem solving strategies. So anything you can do as advisors to help students develop problem solving strategies. I think this is an area that we all probably can continue to learn different ways to address problems and to recognize that not everything is going to be taken care of really easily, and not everything's a simple solution, but that there are a lot of problems that chapter officers face, that advisors face, that just the average chapter member faces, and that we need to be teaching and instilling in our college women the ability to think through, to problem solve, to rationalize, to come up with their list of pros and cons, whatever it is, to help them come to a resolution on problems without using so much emotion, without using so many other external individuals, such as parents or other support entities that they have. Another strategy for advisors working with college students would be reflection and feedback. I know we all have worked with students in situations where maybe they get to the end of a situation or dealing with a problem, and maybe they look back and say, gosh, I wish I hadn't done it the way I did it, or I wish I had done this instead of that. And so that is a very important process to walk through with those women that you advise. Help them think about, why did I do what I did? Why did we respond the way we did? And what does that mean? And then providing them feedback to help them maybe evaluate the situation, and maybe see how they could have responded differently, or they could have handled the situation differently, and then what they would do in the future. And I would also recommend, constructive feedback is a really good thing. I mentioned earlier, these students, these women particularly, have been coddled, they've been sheltered, they've been told they're number one. And unfortunately, when you're on a campus or you're a part of a chapter that is more than just one individual, you serve a different purpose and you serve a different role. And so I think anything that you can do to provide that constructive feedback and reflection only helps them as they grow, as they develop, and as they prepare again for that dream job, which is their long-term nugget that they're looking for during their 4 years. The fourth thing is reaffirm but hold students accountable. I've seen this and heard this already a lot this fall with what's going on across the Kappa world, and also what's going on nationwide on college campuses. Accountability is huge. I think the best thing we can do as advisors and Kappa women who give back to our chapters and alum associations is demonstrate the accountability. So reaffirm when it's appropriate to reaffirm, but holding students accountable. If they say they're going to do something, if their bylaws say one thing, if they have set goals that say one thing, hold them to that. I think so often we have situations on college campuses, particularly where it's so much easier not to hold students accountable because there's usually a lot of work that goes into holding students accountable, usually a lot of follow-up work with whether it's parents or national organizations or advisors or mediation, whatever it may be. Sometimes it's easier to just let things slide, but I would encourage each of you to reaffirm where it's appropriate, but also to hold people accountable, because that's the world we all live in. And then teach resiliency. Resiliency is a word that we are using a lot this semester on our campus, and I'm sure you have all heard it in your work as well. But this ability to bounce back. This today's college student, they're so wrapped up in the profession, being sheltered and wanting to be not wanting to be self-centered, but there is this self-centered nature, team-oriented, the pressure, and that we all, we all have those moments where we maybe don't make the decision that we should have made, or we make a decision we have to deal with the consequences. But resiliency and that ability to bounce back is such an important skill that again, we are really focusing on our campus, and I think Kappa World is focusing on as well. Maybe not naming it that, but definitely teaching women to be resilient and to come back and to reevaluate and to be better. And this first year, again, as I mentioned earlier, the first year is probably not, you probably don't meet with as many women in their first year of college, maybe their second semester, not first semester, but it is such a transitional year. And so if you do get, as we transition on most campuses with our chapter officers, if you do get new students within their first year who are taking on chapter advisor or chapter officer positions, just be aware of that transition, and that maybe their identity, these strategies might not be as helpful with a first year student who's still trying to figure out what college is, how to study. Maybe they came off a really bad first semester and they're coming into the spring and they want to prove themselves, or there's some pressure from home. So anything you can do to help do these 5 things, and I'm sure each of you have strategies that you're employing within your advisor roles on different campuses that I'd love for you to share, and we can share out with the rest of the group. I haven't mentioned parents yet, and I guess that would be considered a strategy for working with college students. I hope you all don't have to work with parents often. I hope you're able to work directly with the student, but probably there have been a couple situations where you have heard from a parent, or you've heard that maybe a parent is not happy with the way something is happening or the way that their daughter was treated. And I would encourage you to communicate with parents openly and upfront, and to set expectations early with parents and stick to it. I think just like with students and with most of us, if someone sets an expectation and we know that up front, then assuming everybody sticks to that, then I think for the most part everybody understands what's going on and why things are the way they are. I would also encourage you, for any of those situations that might involve standards. I know we don't speak to parents, but oftentimes parents still try to solve their students' problem in these situations, or women's problems. And I would redirect the student when at all possible. Whether it's a parent has emailed you and you copy in the student, or sending the email to the student asking the student to follow up with the parent on maybe the question that they have, whether it's on dues or it's on a probation or standards issue, or maybe just on an expectation as a member of our organization. But I have found in my work that for parents who are so quick to accuse, to complain, to really cast the stone at the institution for what they're doing or what they're not doing, oftentimes the parent has just a very small piece of that pie. And so usually if you can get the student involved, get the student involved in, hey, help your mom, help your dad understand why things are the way they are. And more often than not, you do not hear from that parent again. And so that has been a strategy that I've used, particularly this fall, and it seems to be working well. And you definitely don't want to make parents unhappy, but you want to thank them for all the support that they provide, but also that their student is in college, and part of being in college is making decisions, and sometimes if you make the bad decision, you need to be held accountable to that. Again, any questions that y'all have on that, feel free to post. So now what? So you're an advisor, you're reaching the end, hopefully, of your fall semester, and hopefully it's been fairly uneventful for you and that you've had a great fall with the women at your chapter. But these are just some suggestions and what I've observed, both as an advisor but also as a staff member on a campus that interacts with a lot of fraternity and sorority advisors. Model appropriate behavior as an advisor. If you don't want to be the one, or if you don't want to deal with students who don't understand the rules, the expectations, then don't you push that. But model that appropriate behavior, how you would like to communicate, maybe how you have handled similar situations as an undergraduate, maybe a chapter officer. But the undergraduate women look up to you as advisors, and so model the behavior, but also model those skills, model the problem-solving strategies, all of those things that you would want the women to pick up on and learn from, because that's how I see the role of the advisor, is not only advising and supporting, but also really setting the tone and setting an example for what it's like to be a Kappa woman. Be knowledgeable about the age group you advise. Obviously, you all signed up to attend what you thought was Student Development Theory 101, but is really more about today's college student and understanding the nuances and the joys and perils of today's college student, and then what do you need to learn more, or how do you need to adjust your advising to meet the somewhat unique demands of this generation. Take an interest in what the women do, what the campus does, and what their current trends are. Each campus has its own set of challenges, has its own trends, and fun things that go on. And I would encourage you to take an interest in what they do, even if you're doing long distance advising. I think technology really allows us the opportunity to stay connected, either through email or one thing that I do is I subscribe to the campus newspaper from all of my MPC area advisor campuses to just see what's going on. Some newspapers come out daily, some are once a week, but just to get that weekly or daily reminder of what's going on a campus that I'm not on, or a state that I'm not in. And I think that enables you to have a really intentional conversation with the students. You can ask them about a football game, or you can ask them about a particular speaker that came to campus, or a Greek week theme, or homecoming, whatever it is, but you can kind of show that you are connected and involved and take an interest in their campus. I would say have no contact with parents, but let your PDC and RDC make the call on that. But I think that really muddies the water. Our relationship, and even on a college campus, our relationship is with the students, and it's in our best interest, whether we're a college administrator or we are an advisor to a capital chapter on a campus, to help our students solve their own problems, help our students develop strategies for learning how to deal with others, dealing with difficult situations and difficult people. So I think sometimes parents try to sweep in and take control of the situation and try to take care of the problem, but most of the time it just makes the problem worse and a little more complicated. Be patient and persistent. Take the time you need to get to know the student, to develop a sense of trust and a sense of collaboration with them, and then be persistent. Don't just swoop in to solve a problem and then fly back out, but be persistent and be there when things are good and then when things are bad. And then the patience, I think, goes for working with any college student. It takes them a while to get through those 7 vectors of identity development, and sometimes they don't hit all 7 by the time they leave us. So it's their employer's responsibility to get them through that 7th. But be patient and challenge them where it's appropriate to challenge, but also understand that they don't have the experience that you have as an advisor, and that they're learning and trying to figure it out. And so be patient with that. And then staying up to date on campus trends. I mentioned this earlier about reading the campus newspaper, subscribing to some type of campus e-newsletter, whether it comes from the Fraternity and Sorority Life office or it comes from the institution. But really staying up to date about what's going on campus. There's so much that's really changing right now with the sexual assault, Title IX, with high-risk behaviors, with employability and some of the White House requirements and compliance related to student debt and employability and accountability of institutions. So there is a lot going on in the higher ed world. And so, I think it's always good to stay up to date with campus trends and know the types of students that you're working with, and also the situations that your chapters are in. And anytime you can get to know the students is important. I know we've really focused in Capital World on the long distance advising and being accessible through webinars like these and email, which are great, but spending time, whether it's on the phone or making a visit to the chapter, just to get to know those students and being responsive is always helpful. And then asking questions. Our students ask a lot of questions of us, but I think sometimes a good strategy for us would be to ask questions that we already know the answers to. So sometimes that might be handling a situation where you think, I really could just cut to the chase and just tell them what needs to be done, but asking those questions and helping them problem solve, because again, that's one of the characteristics that we know the students coming to our campuses today don't. I'm not going to say they don't have, but they're less strong in their problem solving abilities. And so asking a lot of questions and then helping the students come to those realizations and those answers through those questions, and being very direct. I know most Kappa women are very direct in their questions and direct in what they want done, and so that definitely applies to advisement and supporting today's college student. So that wraps up the presentation that I had tonight. I know I've talked a lot, and I should have probably incorporated some fun quizzes or something like that to break up the presentation, but take any questions that you have, I guess.
Okay, here's a question. How is to handle a group that pushes back when advisors try to take an interest? So it sounds like somebody's getting pushback from the advisors.
Okay.
Or no, the chapter's getting pushback from, yeah, you know what I mean.
Yeah. So it sounds like the advisors might be encouraging chapter to go one direction, and the chapter officers or chapter members are pushing the advisor the other direction. I would suggest spending time. I don't know this particular campus or this particular situation, but I think spending time with people. So you think about maybe a difficult person or somebody that you don't get along with, and how you can make that relationship better. And a lot of that is spending time together to understand why people push the way they do, why they perceive something the way they perceive it. So I would recommend, spending some time finding an advice or an officer or somebody within the chapter who can give you some insight into what's going on, because the pushback is coming from somewhere. Either they're hiding something and they don't want you to know, or they just don't know what they should know, and there might be some trepidation about that. So I would suggest either through a phone call or a visit, if you could do a visit, to be there and just to develop those relationships, and maybe see if you can identify one or two advocates who could help shed some light into what's going on.
Okay. And I think that is it. Unless
Awesome.
there's any last minute rushes to the question pane, but I don't think so. Well,
Awesome.
okay, cool. Well, thank you so much to our presenter, Anna Edwards, and for leading the session. And thank you for your participation today to our participants. If you have questions or comments about today's topic, you may email the presenter directly at her email address, which should be up on the screen. Um, if you would like to be more involved in CAPA virtual training and webinar programs, we would love to have you join our producer team. Please contact Karen Holmes at KKG headquarters for details. The benefits are excellent. The opportunity to support CAPA's webinar program and a front row seat at a great presentation. As we close the webinar, a survey will open on your screen. You will be prompted to respond to a few evaluation questions. Please take a moment to share your thoughts on today's webinar. Your feedback will help us shape future webinar training events. If you have any additional questions or comments whatsoever, please send an email to kholmes, KHOLMES, @kkg.org. Thanks so much, everyone.